next project, I want to talk a little bit about, excuse me, denotation and connotation and what those terms mean and how we actually might be able to use them. So let's start by looking at this. What is this? Most likely you see it as an apple. Yeah, makes sense to me. If you go even deeper, you could probably say that it is a photograph of an apple, but it's just an apple. And that's the denotation, the direct meaning. What it is actually, it is an apple. But what we can do is we can change the meaning of what it is based on some of our things that we pay attention to, things that we want. And that's connotation. So adding an idea or a feeling to the literal. It's an apple, but what about the apple, right? So that apple could be a computer company. It could be a location in New York. And if we go even out there further, it could be something related to health or diet. An apple could also be with something else added onto it, could be related to evil, or it could be related to sin, if you think about it on the left. Could be something else, but that's just another idea. And on the right, it could be related to death. Just taking little parts away and adding something else to it. So we have this connotation that comes along with it. It could be kind of seen as something that's overwhelming or daunting or evil or something that we need to be aware of. Or it could be something that's just used as a pattern to create something different, to make it seem like there's some variety with it too. Again, there's probably more meanings that you come across as you look at these, but just some ideas to think about with how we add what it is and then we add some extra meaning to it. So let's look differently. What is this? Just a skull and crossbones, probably the actual thing. But if we dig a little deeper, what could we have added to it that makes it, right? What are some different meanings could there be? And looking at it this way, well, this is just a few, but each one of these is different, skull and crossbones still, but could be a different audience. It could be more kid-friendly. It could be a pirate. It could be a pirate who loves themselves so much so that they get on their hat, they get the picture of themselves. Or it could be related to danger or poison or something along those lines. There's also there has been a football team in Peoria that's the Pirates, right? So they add color differently, they add style differently. And one thing to look at is each one of these looks a little bit different. The shape of the skull is different, the bones are different, the angles are different. The one on the left doesn't even have a jaw, right? So there's little things that we can do to change the meaning of it, to add that connotation. And part of this in design comes to the idea of signs. And signs really formally look at a word or a mark that stands for something else. And it takes this form as one option, the form of a sign. And it could just be a sound, it could be a word, it could be just a painting. But then we add in the signified, this idea of something. It's kind of still that same idea of denotation and connotation, but we're working with just the sign as well. So it could be, what does that tell us? What is more that we can learn about that sign? And depending on how it's created, yeah, it's just a tree. But depending on how it looks, how it's in relationship to other things, how it is created can tell us even more. So as we're working on this project, how could you use denotation and connotation in your layout with the symbols that you have chosen? So a sign equals the signifier plus the signified. So what it is plus what it means or what it shows into something that means something more. And that can be done with color. It can be done with creation or way that something is created. A lot of variety with that. It can look for a particular audience. It can be exact. It can be perfect. It can be abstract. It can be non-objective. And just some variations here of it's a tree, but how it's created makes meaning more important. Similarly with this giraffe, a lot of different ways that we could create it. Very exact, very positive, very negative, very color focused. Something that looks like it's made out of pixels, something that looks like it's made out of paper, something that makes it look like it is made out of a ladder or little pieces of wood. Each one of those has different meaning. And as we look into this a little bit deeper, you have the idea of signs being an icon, an index, or a symbol, and tools that designers can use. And icons, we'll look at some examples here, but resembles what it stands for. It's really obvious. Index shows a little bit more of what's been represented. It shows something a little more logical. And a symbol kind of adds in meaning that we might not originally know until we understand a little bit more, right? It's more arbitrary. We have to have a background behind it, okay? So an icon could be a tree. We could see the symbol of it, the word tree. Well, yeah, it means a tree, but it's signifying that. Could be an index of a leaf, but that tells us more of a tree, or it could be a symbol, another symbol of a tree as a logo. So just some variety here. Yeah, you could just always write the words. But if you're thinking about words that you're using in your project, could you create it in a different way? Do we have to see the whole tree? Could we see it in a more logo-like look? Could we see just part of it? Do we need to see the whole thing? Bike tells us maybe that it is bike safe. It's a trail that uses bikes. It is just representing that. Index tells us a little bit more, right? Connect it to something that we've experienced. And a symbol tells us even more because we have to have a background in what it is. It could be faith related. It could be the 1960s related. Who knows, depending on what else is around it. So we can add meaning that way. You see this is just a hill and some clouds and some smoke. Well, what could the smoke tell us? Could tell us that it is a fire. It could tell us that in a negative way a fire. It could tell us in a positive way as a fire. It could tell us that somebody's creating and burning and making some art, making some something out of metal. Who knows, right? Just off the top of my head, some things that we could see. So we have to know a little bit more. But most likely, we see smoke in the sky and we think they need some help. We need to call an ambulance, fire truck, etc. This is not a pipe. It's an icon for a pipe. It's a combination of that, but technically it's a painting of a pipe. Kind of what I was saying with the apple or the skull and crossbones. It's not an apple. It's a photograph of that. This is a painting of that. It's not a pipe. Just one way of thinking about it. On the left, we have some more symbols. What do those symbols mean? And you'll find out just thinking about it. Well, it could be one or another, but then we add meaning about the way that it's shaped, the way that it's headed. It could be related to a bank. It could be related to an ATM on the left. It could be a new way that we're using money, right? Could be something that we see at an airport. The context matters a little bit more. Symbol on the right is an airplane, but even if you go deeper, if you've ever noticed, it's actually departures, not arrivals. Arrivals would rotate the plane going down. So being aware of those other things that, oh yeah, it's pointed out, I get it, it makes sense. So thinking a little bit more deeply as you go. On the left, you might see a magnifying glass, and based on our conversation the other day in class, we looked at it as maybe search. Could it be a private eye? Could it be scientific? Who knows? Context matters. How could we use a magnifying glass? How could we use, on the right, it's just image of a snake, illustration of a snake. It's actually for a car, Viper, right? So putting that a little bit more, we add that other shape as a symbol for that particular company and product. What's interesting is that this was actually used in history, where individuals would travel from one neighborhood to the next where they're looking for particular things. And some of these, I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at this, but some of these tell you literally what it is, but then you look at others and you're like, well, that visual doesn't make sense, but knowing the culture might help me a little bit more. Knowing the group or what's being communicated can help a little bit more. So it's just kind of fascinating way of looking about it. So here are some of the projects that we're looking at. We're looking at a historical event. The only text is the date, and what symbols, what signs, what icons, what can we add to tell that story in a little different angle, right? We can keep it simple, we can keep it clean, we can use repetition. We might show the who, what, when, where, why, how kind of concept. We'll be looking at these in class if we miss them, so we'll talk about what they actually are and some other benefits of them, but just giving you some variety of a lot of use of symbols, a lot of things of we see it in one way or another, and the context matters. We put a plug to a heart, it's going to seem different than if it's just a heart, or if it's just the heart on a card, that kind of thing. But location can tell us some things, if it's where in the US. We can use repetition. We can use the positive and negative play. We can use leading lines, focal point guiding us through, those kinds of things. So just some starting point of how you're going to take the next part of your project.